Welcome to Just Wanna Quilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School, where we explore all kinds of things, stories about quilting, tools, field trips, maybe some famous quilters stop by, and of course a little bit of copyright thrown in just for fun. My name's Elizabeth Townsend Guard, and I'm the host, and this is Just Wanna Quilt. Today's guest is Julia Driscoll. She's a quilter, she's a librarian, she teaches kids how to sew at the library. She's incredibly creative, super fun. I hope you enjoy it. She was a lot of fun, and she's now part of our Quilting Army. All right, so we are here. It is June 2017, and I'm here in Chicago with Julia. Mm-hmm. And we're going to talk a little bit about Julia's quilting and sewing life. So, Julia, tell me, what's your first memory of sewing or quilting? How old were you?
So my first memory of doing sewing is different than my first memories of sewing happening, because my mother always sewed. Yeah. She learned in a 4-H club when she was younger, but her sewing concentrated on clothes. She didn't do a lot of it. She had an old clunky Kenmore from the 60s, and it wasn't in great shape by the time I was old enough to learn. So I expressed an interest in learning to sew, and she showed me the machine, but she insisted on threading it every time and whatnot. I don't even know how old I was, probably like 8 or something. We made a jumper for me, but I didn't actually like it all that much once it was done.
Yeah.
So, I kind of steered away from it. I actually got into sewing through needlework. I did a fair amount of cross-stitching as a hobby. And
you did?
Yes.
I did too.
Yeah. Yeah.
How old were you when you started cross-stitching?
Tweens.
Yeah.
Somewhere
awesome,
in there.
Right?
Yeah. And then I cross-stitched a couple wedding presents for some friends who got married. I did 2 of those. And then I made a couple things for myself. And I made one thing for myself. And then I said, the next thing I want to do is a quilt. Because I had found this Leisure Arts quilt book, I don't remember, it's How to Quilt, basically, but I'm not sure that that's the exact title. And it
How
had
old
all
were
these.
You at this time?
At this point, I was in my mid-20s. Cool. Was right around the time Brian and I got married, so 24, 25-ish. And so that's the quilt that I started cutting, piecing, sewing by hand. I thought, I'm going to do it right, because I'm a perfectionist.
So the first one you did by hand.
The entire top was done by hand. It's a queen-size top, and it was done by hand. But it has, nearly 20 years later, yet to be finished, because I didn't enjoy the actual up-down quilting, the layers process.
Right.
But I have actually completed other things. So, and I've played with a lot of styles. Yeah. I own quite a few quilt books, most of which are kind of more for an inspiration on a technique. Yeah. But if I read something, or if I see it and I see a few instructions, I usually can remember that. I'm very visual in my memory.
So when you look at patterns or you look at books, it's for the inspiration to sort of create your own, would you say? Or
more often, yeah. Occasionally I will do something the way they said, but it's really unusual when it comes to quilts, because they're flat, and that I'm not tweaking something size or this, that, or the other thing. Rarely do I follow stuff to the letter once I get the principle of the idea. Right. So I'm trying to think of some of the things I finished. I did use patterns from that first quilt book to make throw pillows for my mother-in-law one year. And then when my parents had, I want to say 30th, 35th anniversary, somewhere in there, I made a wall hanging quilt for them that was a double wedding ring pattern.
Very cool.
Also, I had templates for the double wedding ring that I had gotten through some off-sale hobby deal thing, and my mother at the time had said, don't lose those. Those things are worth a lot of money, and I didn't realize how much so until many years later when I actually was looking at that kind of stuff. What was next? As far as designing my own kinds of things, the biggest one would be, and physically biggest and probably in a lot of ways most challenging, would be the wedding quilt that we made for my mom and I made for my brother and his wife, because I had to lay out the gradient design, and I had to design it with this gradient background that went from pale yellow into the oranges, fiery reds, darker reds, chocolate browns, and so all of that was little squares or triangles.
But you were telling me this at dinner, and it's
Yeah.
like you're not even doing it justice. Like, how many fabrics were there?
70 to 75 fabrics.
I can't even imagine the complexity of it.
So its shape was really traditional because it was either like little 4-inch squares or 3 or 4-inch squares, or triangles, half square. I mean, half square, basically, half square triangles, along with what you would think of as a background fabric, but we made that the front fabric of these pinwheels. And I will have to find my Flickr account and send you a picture of this thing, because I don't have a great photo, but but I have good enough that you'll get the idea.
Right.
So I'll have to remember to do that. One of the more original things that I did, so my daughter had some health problems in her infancy, and I stopped working when she was not quite a year old, because it was just, she was sick all the time. I was calling in absent all the time. It was ridiculous. And fortunately that all worked out with time and growing. But I was sitting at home watching a quilting show, and they were doing these photo quilts, and I'm like, I don't like her photos because her skin tones are not right. But I was so inspired by this idea that, like, basically I packed up the baby and we went to the quilt store, and I took her 1-year-old photo and converted it into a quilt. So I over a period of a few weeks, and I traced out the different oddball shapes kind of for the different shades and shadows.
That's
and
amazing.
The dress came out fantastically. The skin tones not as much, so later on I actually bought some dye from don't know if I can remember the name of the company, but I can come up with it if I need it to later. But it was fabric dye, and I made different gradient shades for skin tones in little portions, because I'm so fussy about color and everything. And honestly, in her face, there was too much difference between like the mid-tone and the dark tone, because it looked like she had like burn scars or something. That wasn't ideal, but it was my first shot at something like that.
Very cool. So when I hear you talk, I hear about incredible creativity, sort of artistic flair. I hear you taking inspiration from things and making them your own. I'm curious, and then also you do quilts for special occasions or to mark moments in your life. Would you say that's true?
Very true. I made a quilt for my husband's grandparents' 50th anniversary. I didn't get it finished on time. It was a photo quilt. Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
It was only like 2 years late. But the reason it got done when it got done is because his grandmother got really, really sick. She had cancer, was sick for, like 3-4 months before she passed away. And I'm rushing to finish this quilt. Yeah. And one of the most touching moments of my life, we got the quilt to her. My husband and my daughter went to visit. I wasn't able to because of work, though I did go to the funeral. And when I'm at the funeral in the home, they've got my quilt up on display by the casket, and they said this was her warm lap blanket that she kept her family around her with all the time. Yeah. And it was just like I was like, it never even occurred to me how much meaning that would bring both of them, because Grandpa still has it at his house and still keeps it, and
it's amazing.
Yeah.
I feel like quilting is love. Like, as you're sewing it, as you're designing it, like that's part of what you're giving is love.
Yes, I would agree. And anything, I think, when it comes to sewing is love. In that respect, if you're making a gift, because last Christmas I made, I believe it was 34 pillowcases for family as Christmas gifts. Didn't have a lot of money, so bought the fabric throughout the year, And the girls got Christmas themed fabric, the guys got their sports teams, and everybody got 2 pillowcases, but they were, made.
They're special.
At home, they were made and chosen with them in mind. And I was really nervous about my brother's wife, because I'm like, her taste, sometimes it's, really kind of modern and fun and whimsical, and sometimes it's very kind of traditional in a kind of classic kind of way. And I ended up making 2 different sets, because I was like, I don't know. And then she liked them both and wanted them both. So, that I was like, great. Okay, success.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
But yeah, I mean, and there is something about the process of quilting that, and putting things together. I think of myself as an arranger as much as anything. And maybe that's because I'm a librarian and I studied with the original intention to be a cataloger and take these disparate pieces of information and put them together into this useful, collective, valuable whole, complete object that can be used and accessed by other people.
I love it. So do you feel like are you using your librarian skills when you're quilting in some way? Your librarian organizing brain in some way?
I think they're related. I mean, I've always seen the world color first, and which so. But yeah, there's a part of me, and I have different kinds of arrangements, of course, for things that are informational versus aesthetic and so on. But it all sort of feels interconnected when you're building something to make I don't think of myself as an artist. I truly do not, because everything that I've done are tweaks. They're not so incredibly original that someone would look and go, oh, I never thought of such a thing. I tend to think of true art as being coming from a very thoughtful, thought-provoking kind of place. And the people that I admire as fabric artists, and I used to get these quilt calendars. There was a different quilt on every week for the year. Those were the planners I used some years ago. Those people truly were artists. They were making these magnificent items. I think of myself as a crafter, as an arranger, as and even with my sewing of anything, honestly, I am not that. I mean, I'm fussy, but I'm not. I'm not doing everything the so-called right way. I think it would be really cool to learn couture sewing techniques and make ball gowns, but not only is that not likely to happen in my life, I would still probably be like, nobody's going to see this spot anyway, and then just and be done with it. So for me, I actually learned to sew on a sewing machine because I already knew how to quilt and sew pieces together. And, some of it were things I remember doing with my mom, but a lot of it is stuff I just sort of figured out by different stuff I read or shows I watched or what have you. Because this, of course, is mostly pre-YouTube days.
Right. Very different now.
So, yeah.
So, do you find sewing relaxing? Do you find it stressful?
Both. Yeah. When I'm in a groove, once I know what I'm doing, yes, it's relaxing. I enjoy it, and I just want to make stuff because it's fun. I am like probably every other crafter in the universe. Like, I have bigger eyes than my stomach when it comes to fabric and crafts and all of that, because I have 1,000 projects that I've never finished.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Are you somebody? So hold on, I'm going to cough just a second.
No problem.
So, are you somebody that gets fabric for a project, or do you like to collect things like for a stash, or both?
Both. Mostly it's project because I can't really afford stash fabric at this point. I had started some stash fabric. I still have pieces in a stash, but very rarely have I bought fabric without it intending it to be towards something specific.